I used to believe that silence was harmless, that quiet was only the absence of noise, not a presence in itself. But the Hollow Chasm taught me otherwise. Deep inside its unending throat, silence becomes a substance. Heavy, watchful, a thing pressing in from every surface of jagged stone. It listens, it waits, and if you listen long enough, you begin to understand the horrifying truth. You're not alone down there, even when every echo dies. I didn't go into the chasm to find monsters. I didn't even go to test myself or to prove anything to anyone. I went because of my brother, because of the crack in his voice when he told me he was going down for a survey expedition, because of the awkward grin he gave when he said he'd be back in 3 days, because of the call I received a week later. His team had vanished. No signs of a rockslide, no broken equipment, no blood, no bodies, just absence, just silence. I told the rescue officials that I was coming to help, but really, I didn't care whether I lived or died in the process. If the chasm had taken him, then the chasm could take me too. In some twisted part of my mind, that felt like reunion. But when I reached the lip of the canyon and looked into that impossible wound carved into the earth, all of that resolve flickered. People talk about deep canyons, bottomless pits, labyrinthine cave systems. They lie without meaning to. They don't know what bottomless looks like until they stare over the edge of the hollow. The earth falls away in sheer vertical cliffs, so straight and smooth in places that it looks carved by a hand with intention. Shadows pool in ledges hundreds of meters down, and below those more shadows layered like oil. The sun can't even reach the central throat of this place. It swallows light. A cold draft breathes upward. A steady, slow inhalation, like the canyon itself is alive and waiting for something to fall into its mouth. I clipped my main rope to the iron anchoring pitons hammered into the rock by past expeditions. Some successful, some not, and leaned back. The harness dug into my hips, steadying me against the first drop. I whispered into the yawning wind, "I'm coming, Jonah." Then I began my descent. Every sound I made trembled along the rope and into the abyss. Even my breath felt too loud. My heartbeat felt like a drum in a crypt. I climbed carefully, steadily, each jolt of muscle and flex of fingers sending vibrations into the stone. The canyon felt aware. I tried to tell myself that was just anxiety, but something about the air was off. My helmet lamp flicked across eroded cliff faces, the scars of centuries of falls, storms, flooding. But then I noticed something else. On several areas of the wall, the stone was unnaturally smooth. Not eroded smooth, polished smooth, as though something had rubbed against it repeatedly. The first time I saw one of those patches, a tremor rolled through me. I reached out and touched it with gloved fingers. The surface felt cold, slick, unnervingly uniform. A few grains of dust clung to my glove when I pulled away. My rope creaked as I shifted, and the sharp sound echoed far too long and too cleanly. I forced myself not to think about what might have rubbed the stone that way. After a few hours of careful descent, the sky above had become only a narrow strip, cutting across the top of the world like a wound sewn with blue thread. The darkness below had thickened into something that felt physical, like fog with weight. My lamp could only pierce 10, maybe 15 meters of it. I kept going. My arms ached. My legs burned. My mouth had gone dry long ago. Still I went down. At one point, I paused on a ledge no wider than my boots, a small break in the constant drop. A gust of wind blew upward again, cold enough to sting my cheeks. But beneath the wind, I heard something else. A faint tapping, like pebbles clicking against each other. It echoed irregularly, coming from somewhere deep down in the darkness.
Top.
Pause.
Top, top.
Another pause.
Top.
It didn't sound like rockfall. It sounded rhythmic, intentional. I leaned back over the edge, my stomach tightening as the darkness drank in the movement of my lamp. "Jonah," I whispered, though I knew he wouldn't be tapping rocks together for fun. My voice barely came out, swallowed immediately by the cavernous throat of the chasm. No answer, just another tap. This one closer. I decided not to linger on the ledge. As I went deeper, the canyon walls began to change. The roughness returned. A natural texture, sharp in places, crumbly in others, but interspersed throughout were more of those smooth patches. At one point, I passed a huge span of wall, maybe 10 meters across, completely polished. And not flat. There were long grooves carved through it, subtle but visible, like something massive had dragged itself upward or downward. The grooves were parallel, deliberate. My breath quickened. Something had climbed here. Something big. Instinct screamed at me to turn. You can replace this text with any text you wish. You can either write in this text box or paste your own text here. Try different languages and voices. Change the speed and the pitch of the voice. You can even tweak the SSML, speech synthesis markup language, to control how the different sections of the text sound. Click on SSML above to give it a try. Enjoy using text-to-speech. Through the air. I kept going. Meters passed. Then tens of meters. Then hundreds. My mind floated somewhere between panic and numb endurance. I entered a kind of trance. Lower, brace, breathe. Ignore the sounds. Ignore the way the darkness shifts. Ignore the feeling of being watched. When the tapping changed again. Faster. More eager. I didn't understand immediately. Not until my lamp revealed another ledge. A man was sitting on it. He was slumped against the rock, one leg hanging loosely off the edge. At first, hope punched through me so hard I nearly sobbed. Jonah. It had to be Jonah. But when I lowered myself closer, I saw the man's hair was too short, too pale. His jawline wrong. His shoulders narrower. Not Jonah. He wasn't dead, though. His chest rose and fell shallowly. A rattling breath scraped from his throat. One of his arms was bent at an impossible angle. His face was gaunt, pale, covered in stone dust, eyes half open and vacant. I dropped onto the ledge as gently as I could and rushed to him. Hey, hey, can you hear me? His eyes flicked, but not to me. To the wall behind me. His cracked lips parted. A whisper clawed out. Don't move. I froze. The scraping behind me was so faint I almost doubted it. Almost. I turned my head slowly. Something was pulling itself onto the ledge. Something with stone-colored skin. Something with too many limbs. Something whose eyes glinted like wet obsidian in the lamplight. I couldn't move. My arms felt like they were filled with lead. My breath caught in my chest, but I forced it out, shallow and deliberate. Every survival instinct screamed at me to run, to climb, to scream. But the creature had already noticed me. Or maybe it had always known I was here. Its limbs, spindly yet unnaturally strong, gripped the stone with a sickening suction, dragging it closer. The scraping sound filled the narrow ledge, a slow, methodical sound, like nails being sharpened against rock. The man on the ledge whispered again. They watch the vibrations. Always. They know. His voice trailed off, a husky rasp as if the sound alone was painful. I tried to process it. Vibrations. That explained the way the scraping moved around me, how it seemed to know where I was without appearing fully. The hollow chasm was alive, not in the metaphorical way people say of landscapes, but alive in a predatory sense, with its hunters perfectly adapted to it. The creature's head turned slightly, and I saw its eyes. Too many, clustered, wet like liquid on stone. No facial features beyond the eyes and a suggestion of a mouth that flexed open and closed rhythmically. It seemed to taste the air, sensing me. Its limbs stretched forward, bending at angles that human bones would shatter trying to replicate. I didn't have time to think. The rope above me was my only lifeline. If I climbed, it would notice my movements. If I stayed, it would notice my presence. Panic clawed at my skull. The man's eyes, blank, but trying to convey some warning, locked with mine. They wait for the sound. Don't step wrong. I swallowed and nodded, though he couldn't see it clearly. I couldn't think of how to respond. The creature edged closer, and the ledge trembled slightly under the weight of its approach. Then I remembered my knife. A small blade, barely enough to cut rope or scrape stone. But it was all I had. I gripped it tight. If it came for me, I'd have to strike blindly. My hands shook violently, and the metal felt slippery in the sweat of fear. The creature stopped. Its multiple eyes scanned the ledge, assessing, calculating. Its limbs twitched. Then, just as suddenly, it retreated. It melted back into the darkness below, almost as if it had never been there. The scraping stopped. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. But the presence didn't vanish. I could feel it. The man groaned, and I turned to him. He had been muttering incoherently, words breaking off mid-sentence. His leg had shifted, now dangling further over the edge. Blood seeped from shallow cuts across his forearm, but the pale color of his skin suggested that he had been here a long time, surviving only by some stubborn instinct. "Can walk?" I asked him cautiously. He shook his head. "No, to watch." I understood then. He wasn't warning me about the creature's immediate attack. He was warning me about the whole canyon. Every step, every sound, every small movement, the walls themselves carried the warning. The creatures were part of it. They were extensions of it. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my panic. The only option was to move. Slowly, carefully, every motion calculated. My gloves gripped the rope, and I shifted my weight, testing each micro-movement before committing. The man groaned again but didn't resist. I could only hope he would survive if I moved him upward slowly enough. We began the ascent. In be acrucitin in. The rope strained under our combined weight. Above us, the canyon stretched like a gray wall, endless and unyielding. Every sound of shifting hands, rubbing boots, even the faintest scrape of clothing against stone, sent vibrations through the air. My stomach churned with fear. Minutes stretched into hours. I lost count. My arms trembled, my grip slipping more than once. The man muttered fragments of words, half warnings, half pleas. Don't look down. They hear. I tried not to. I fixed my gaze on the wall above, following the faint grooves carved by previous climbers, trying to find some pattern, some rhythm. The chasm was teaching me a terrible, relentless lesson. Sound was life. One wrong note, one careless movement, and the creatures would know exactly where we were. Then a shift. A faint scraping sound beneath us, closer than before. My blood ran cold. The creatures were tracking us, moving, waiting for the vibrations that told them where our weight pressed into the stone. I froze. The man's voice whispered in my ear. They, like, sound. They, feed. The word reverberated in my skull. I hadn't considered that these beings hunted like predators. Not randomly, not out of instinct alone. They were deliberate, methodical, and we had just become their prey. The scraping stopped as suddenly as it had started. Too sudden. My fingers ached. My muscles burned. Sweat stung my eyes. Every nerve screamed to run, to escape, but we couldn't. The rope anchored us. Our only lifeline was the stone beneath our hands and the air between us and the creatures. Hours passed. Perhaps only minutes. Time was meaningless here. The darkness was a living thing, pressing in, whispering against our ears. Every shift in the wall, every micro-vibration of the stone, was a threat. Then I saw it, a faint glow far below. I couldn't explain it, but it seemed unnatural. The creatures hadn't appeared, but the light pulsed in rhythm with the canyon itself. I stared, trying to make sense, and the man on the ledge whispered again, his voice a rasping hiss. They lure. They trap. Light vibrations. Sound? I didn't understand. Not yet, but instinct told me to ignore it. Yet the chasm had a pull, an almost magnetic attraction. Something inside me wanted to descend, to see what lay at the source. But survival screamed against it. I pressed on, upwards, until our progress became torturous. The man's arm finally gave way, and he slipped slightly, only to be caught by my harness. My shoulder screamed in protest. My heart pounded. My breath caught. But I held him, and we continued. Then came the smell. A rank, metallic scent that made bile rise in my throat. It was sharp, like blood mixed with rot, with something I couldn't place. The creatures below had marked the ledge. The chasm itself had become a predator. And I knew then, there was no safety in height, no refuge anywhere. The hollow was infinite, and we were in its grip. I gagged on the stench, swallowing bile as I gritted my teeth. The man beside me shivered violently, his broken leg twisting beneath him. I gritted my jaw and forced myself to focus. There was only one way forward, up, slowly, every micro-movement deliberate, every sound accounted for. The rope became an extension of my body, a lifeline and a warning system. I could feel every vibration, every tension along its length. Then, just as I thought we might make progress, a deep rumble rolled up from beneath us. Not a sound like rock settling, not a hollow echo from the walls, but a living, resonant vibration that traveled up the canyon and shook the ledge beneath our feet. The man groaned, his eyes fluttering shut. "They hear," he rasped. I froze, muscles taut, my breath shallow. The chasm responded to sound, and now it was aware of us, fully. The scraping started again, not subtle this time, deliberate and methodical, circling beneath us, moving in a rhythm almost too precise. Something was approaching, something enormous. My lamp flickered and I nearly dropped it. I forced myself to hold it steady, training the beam down the cliff. First, I saw nothing. Then, a massive shadow slid along the rock face below, a shape too large to be human, limbs bending impossibly as it clung to the stone. Its multiple eyes reflected my light, glimmering wet and black. I swallowed hard. The creatures weren't just hunting. They were intelligent. They coordinated, circling, anticipating every shift, every movement we made. I turned to the man. He was barely conscious now, shaking violently. His lips moved. "Trap? Don't fall." I had no choice. I clipped my knife to my harness and gritted my teeth. Every motion had to be perfect. Every sound had to be measured. I began to climb again, inch by inch, my arms burning, my gloves slick with sweat. The creatures below mirrored us, keeping pace, staying just out of reach but always present. Hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Darkness swallowed the chasm entirely. My lamp became my only connection to reality. I couldn't stop thinking about Jonah, about why I had come here. Fear mingled with desperation. Wanted to scream, but my voice might bring the creatures closer. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then I heard it, a voice, not human, not fully, a rasping whisper that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "Leave, leave, leave." I froze. The man stirred weakly, his eyes half opening. "They speak, not human." I realized with a cold, sinking horror that the chasm had its own language, its own consciousness. The creatures weren't merely animals, they were extensions of it. Predators bound to a hive mind that understood vibrations, movements, sound, and perhaps even thought. My fingers slipped slightly on the rope. A small sound, barely audible. The creatures reacted instantly. Scraping intensified below. Multiple shapes emerged from the darkness, moving fluidly, their limbs stretching impossibly, their eyes glinting like wet stone. The ledge trembled under their coordinated presence. Panic clawed at me. The man groaned again, and I could feel his weight shifting dangerously. One wrong move, and both of us would fall into the darkness. Into them. I forced myself to breathe, to slow my heartbeat. Logic told me that climbing slowly, deliberately, and staying aware of every microvibration was our only chance. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to flee, to scream, to strike. But I knew we couldn't. Not here. Not now. I inched upward, my arms trembling, my shoulders screaming in protest. Every small handhold became a lifeline, every foothold a decision between life and death. The creatures below followed, mimicking, anticipating. Their movements were not chaotic, they were precise, calculated, predatory. Suddenly, the man's weak voice cut through the terror. "Not alone, Jonah?" My heart leapt. Hope, but it twisted immediately into dread. He wasn't saying Jonah was alive. He was warning me. Jonah wasn't alone. Something else had found him. Something worse. I didn't pause to question it. I climbed. The chasm seemed to contract around me, walls narrowing, shadows thickening. The scraping, tapping, and low rumble below formed a terrifying symphony. I couldn't tell if it was one creature or many, but their coordination suggested a pack, or something more sinister. Ours blurred. My hands were raw, my legs a trembling scaffold of pain. I climbed, driven by fear, desperation, and an obsession I couldn't articulate. I had to reach Jonah. I had to know. Then I heard the sound I had been dreading. A scream, not human, not fully. A sound that pierced through the darkness, reverberating through stone and air alike. My stomach turned. The creatures below paused, almost as if acknowledging it. And then they moved faster, sliding along the walls with terrifying speed, coordinating, hunting. I forced the man to climb. He could barely hold himself upright, but I had no choice. Inch by agonizing inch we rose. Each micro-movement was a calculation, each shift of weight a gamble. The scream echoed again. Closer, farther, unrelenting. I felt it before I saw it. A presence on the ledge above. My breath caught. My lamp caught a glimpse. A pale figure, tall, distorted, moving impossibly, limbs bending inhumanly. Its eyes were black, glimmering, and it tilted its head as if studying us. I froze. The man beside me groaned. The creature above tilted its head further. It didn't attack. Not yet. Seemed to be considering, waiting. Then I saw the scratches on the ledge ahead. Deep gouges in the stone, fresh and glistening. Evidence that someone or something had been here before us. And then I realized the creature above wasn't alone. Its companions were hidden in the darkness, watching, waiting. The chasm wasn't just alive. It was a hunter, and we had entered its lair. I swallowed, forcing myself to move. One hand, one foot, one careful motion at a time. The creatures below mirrored us, relentless, unyielding. The presence above followed every movement, silent but palpable. And then, faintly, I heard Jonah's voice, weak, shattered, desperate. "Help me." I froze, trembling. Relief surged, almost blinding, and then terror followed immediately. The voice was close, but the creatures were everywhere. I realized that reaching him might mean stepping into their trap entirely. But I couldn't leave him. Not my brother. Not after everything. I steeled myself. I forced the man beside me to climb faster, ignoring his groans, ignoring my own pain. Every inch brought us closer to the source of Jonah's voice, and every inch brought the creature's presence closer, surrounding, watching, calculating. The chasm was no longer just a place. It was a predator, and we were its prey. We moved faster now, driven by that voice, Jonah's voice. It was faint, but it was unmistakable. Each rasp of air, each sound he made felt like a desperate cry in the endless silence of the chasm. He was close, too close, and the creatures knew it. I could feel their presence tightening around us, like the walls of the canyon were closing in, narrowing the space between us and the abyss below. The man beside me was barely conscious now, his movements jerky and disjointed, but somehow he clung to the rope. I had to keep him going, had to keep moving. Jonah's voice, faint and broken, echoed again. "Help, help me." I didn't have the luxury of hesitation. The darkness ahead grew denser as we climbed. The faintest glow from my helmet light flickered against the stone. The walls of the chasm felt alive, pulsing, vibrating, as if the canyon itself had become aware of us. Every scrape of our boots, every shift of the rope sent ripples of sound into the void. The creatures below reacted immediately, their scraping, their clicking, growing louder and more urgent. And then I saw it, a faint glow beneath us, too steady to be natural. A soft, eerie light, like fireflies but too cold, too unnatural. My heart clenched, and I almost stopped breathing. I wasn't sure whether it was Jonah's location or something else, something more sinister. Then I saw the ledge. It wasn't wide, barely enough space for both of us, but it was a place to rest, a place to gather my thoughts, if I could. I pulled the man up, each movement slower now, his body slack and uncooperative. Every breath felt like it would be my last as I fought the panic rising in my chest. When we finally reached the ledge, I pulled him into the corner, trying to give us some shelter, some space from whatever might be coming next. I checked the rope and tightened the knots, securing it in place. The glow beneath us flickered again, almost mocking me. It was coming from deeper in the chasm. It felt like it was calling us forward, like it was alive, drawing us into its depths. But Jonah's voice broke through again. Louder. Please help. There was no time to question it. Without thinking, I started down again, leaving the man behind on the ledge. I couldn't afford to look back. Jonah's voice was becoming more frantic, more desperate. His words jumbled, but there was no mistaking the fear in them. The creatures had stopped scraping for the moment, but the silence between each click and scratch was almost worse. I could feel them moving in the darkness below, circling. They were waiting for me to make a mistake. They were watching, listening. I descended faster now, my body protesting every movement. The rock walls were slick, smooth in places, almost polished, and my gloved fingers struggled to find grip. Couldn't stop. Not now. Jonah needed me. He had to be close. Then, as I rounded a corner of stone, I saw it. A body. It was Jonah. His body was slumped against the wall, pale and gaunt, his clothes torn and frayed. His eyes were wide open, but they didn't focus on anything. His skin had a sickly, ashen hue, like he had been here too long. But when I reached out to touch him, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the chasm. And then his eyes snapped into focus. He gasped, a broken, hoarse sound that barely made it past his throat. "Don't move," he whispered, his lips trembling. They hear." The realization hit me like a blow to the chest. Jonah wasn't the only one here. Not by a long shot. I glanced around, my heart racing, and saw shadows creeping from the walls, shapes moving too fast, too fluidly to be human. They were closing in on us. I tried to pull Jonah up, but his weight was dead against me. His limbs were stiff, unresponsive. He wasn't just weak. He was drained, as though something had been slowly sucking the life out of him. The creatures, whatever they were, had left their mark on him, and now they were ready to claim him. I lifted him, forcing him to stand, my own body trembling with the effort. But as soon as I moved, a click echoed from the darkness. A sound so sharp, so sudden, that I froze. My blood went cold. Something was watching us. Something with too many eyes. Something that thrived on sound. I didn't need to hear it again to know we were being hunted. The scraping came in a wave, a cacophony that echoed from every direction. There was no escape now. The creatures weren't just stalking us. They were cornering us. Jonah's body hung limp in my arms, his head lolling back. He was barely conscious, but his breath was shallow, ragged. "Jonah!" I whispered desperately, shaking him, but he didn't respond. The scraping intensified, a deafening sound that rattled my teeth. And then I saw them. A cluster of figures emerged from the darkness, their forms shifting and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. They were tall, elongated, their limbs too long and too thin, their faces too smooth and too still. Their eyes reflected the light of my lamp in 1,000 glistening shards. They moved as if they were one, a synchronized unit of predators. I backed up, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind scrambling for a way out. But there was nowhere to go. The rope was too far away, and even if I reached it, the creatures would be on us before I could escape. One of them extended its limbs, stretching them forward, fingers clicking against the stone. Its eyes were fixed on me, its head cocked slightly as if considering me. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in any language I knew, but in sound. A low, guttural hum, a resonance that vibrated in my chest. It was as if the canyon itself was speaking, as if the walls were alive, pulsating with life, with hunger. I felt the sound crawl beneath my skin, burrowing into my bones. I looked at Jonah, desperation and fear warring inside me. He was almost gone. His body was slack, drained of all color, his once vibrant eyes dull and empty. The creatures had already taken him. No, I whispered to myself.
No.
I'm not losing you too. I forced myself to focus, to think. The creatures were studying us, waiting for us to make a mistake. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. They had all the time in the world. They were patient, deliberate. They would break us down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And then I remembered something, the vibrations. They were attuned to every sound, every shift in weight, every breath. Couldn't just move. I had to move quietly. I had to throw them off. I scanned the shadows around me, looking for anything I could use, anything to distract them. The rock walls loomed high above, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was the creatures themselves. Too many eyes, too many senses. They were connected to the chasm, to its very pulse. The only way out was to escape their attention. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. Then, without warning, I shoved Jonah's body into the corner of the stone ledge and moved quickly toward the shadows. My knife flashed in my hand, and I sliced through the rock, sending small pebbles and debris tumbling into the darkness. The creatures shifted, their heads turning toward the noise. But it wasn't enough. The vibrations didn't fool them. They had felt the shift. They knew where I was. I started climbing again. The scraping below intensified, and the creatures were closing in. I could feel them on the walls around me, their limbs scuttling like insects, too fast to track with my eyes. My heart thudded in my ears, drowning out the other sounds. And then I heard the voice again. Jonah's voice. "Help me, please." I couldn't leave him. I couldn't leave him to die here, alone, in this endless dark. I grabbed him again, pulling him up, but the creatures were too close. I could feel their cold, alien presence surrounding me, their eyes watching, waiting for the moment when I would falter. I moved faster now, my mind a blur of fear and panic, and when I reached the rope, I didn't stop. I grabbed it, wrapping my legs around it, and began to climb, up, away from them. The creatures swarmed around us, their forms shifting and stretching in ways that made my stomach twist. But I didn't look back. Couldn't. Jonah's body was growing colder in my arms, his skin growing paler by the second. He was slipping away, and I couldn't stop it. I pulled harder. But the creatures were still coming. They were always coming. I climbed faster, my hands slick with sweat, my legs burning with every movement. Jonah's body was limp in my arms, and I could feel him growing colder with each passing second. His breath was shallow, his pulse weak. The creatures were still below, still circling, their movements impossibly fast. Their eyes followed every tremor, every vibration. They were closing in. The rope creaked as I ascended, the rock walls narrowing around me. The ledge where I had left the man seemed miles away now, but I couldn't stop. I had to reach the top. I had to escape this nightmare. Jonah's body grew heavier with every pull, and I felt my strength begin to give out. My fingers slipped on the rope, and for a moment, I thought I might fall. The thought of plummeting into the abyss below, to be devoured by those creatures, paralyzed me. But I couldn't afford to fall. Not now. The scraping sound returned. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was deafening. The creatures were moving faster, closing the distance between us. The vibrations in the stone were almost unbearable now, shaking my very bones. I glanced down for a split second, and that was all it took. A creature had scaled the cliff and was perched just below me. Its limbs stretched impossibly far, too many, too thin, all jointed in ways that should have been impossible. Its eyes glistened, black and empty, as it reached out with one of its grotesque appendages, clawing at the air. My heart skipped a beat. Panic surged through me like an electric shock. I knew I couldn't outrun them. There was no escape, no safety. The canyon had become a trap, and we were the prey. I pulled Jonah higher, my body screaming in protest, my muscles shaking with exhaustion. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. The creatures were getting closer. I could feel the vibration of their movements all around me, their twisted limbs reaching out to snare me. And then, for a brief moment, everything stopped. The creatures froze, their attention snapping to something behind me. I didn't turn to look. Couldn't. I kept climbing, heart pounding, trying to block out the sounds that echoed in my head. But then the whisper came. A voice, not human, not animal, but something else entirely. Something born of the chasm itself. The voice was deep, resonant, vibrating in the very air around me. Leave this place. It wasn't a command. It was a warning, a plea. The voice seemed to ripple through the rock, reverberating in the depths of the canyon. The creatures below shifted in unison, moving away from the walls, retreating into the shadows. They didn't disappear. They just stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe the chasm was alive in a way I hadn't understood before. Maybe it wasn't just the creatures that hunted. Maybe the entire canyon was a living, breathing organism. An ancient, primal thing that fed off the very presence of life that dared to enter its depths. I didn't dare look back. Not for a second. I kept climbing, each movement a desperate attempt to escape the clutches of whatever was lurking behind me. The rope stretched tight as I pulled Jonah upward, inch by painful inch. And then, through the darkness, I saw the faintest glimmer of light. A sliver of blue sky, almost imperceptible, but real. It was the world above, the world I thought I had left behind. But as I reached for it, the sound came again. The scraping. Closer. Faster. The creatures were moving again. They hadn't left. They were waiting. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything that could save us. I had no weapons, no tools, just my wits and my determination. And then, in a split second of clarity, I realized what I had to do. I couldn't just climb. I had to fight. I yanked my knife free from my harness, my hand shaking as I clutched the handle. The rope swayed beneath me, stretching toward the bottomless abyss, and I couldn't help but glance down. The creatures were closing in again. They were moving with horrifying speed, their eyes glinting in the dim light. I was running out of time. I reached the top, the ledge just above me, my fingers scraping against the rough rock. With one last surge of strength, I pulled myself up, dragging Jonah with me. The world above felt unreal, bright, open, and full of air. It felt like a dream, and I almost couldn't believe it. But then, as my hand reached for the final edge, a massive weight crashed into my back. The creatures had followed us. I gasped, throwing my elbow back, trying to break free from the thing that had grabbed me. Its claws, sharp and cold, slashed at the air around me, just inches from my skin. The other creatures scrambled up the walls, their grotesque limbs stretching, reaching, their jaws snapping as they tried to pull me back into the chasm. I swung the knife wildly, the blade slicing through the air, barely grazing one of the creatures. But it didn't stop. It kept coming, its eyes fixed on me with cold, calculating malice. In that moment, I knew I couldn't outrun them. I couldn't outfight them, but I could buy us time. With a final, desperate pull, I dragged Jonah to the edge and shoved him onto the ledge. The creatures were almost upon us, their claws snapping at the air. I didn't have a choice. I threw myself backward, pushing Jonah away from the ledge, toward the safety of the outside world. I couldn't think. I just had to survive. The creatures shrieked in unison, their twisted forms lurching forward. They were upon me, swarming over me, their limbs dragging me down, their cold, black eyes glimmering with hunger. But as they pulled me into the abyss, I remembered one last thing. The canyon was alive. And if I died here, it wouldn't be just my body they fed on. It would be my very essence. The darkness swallowed me whole. I couldn't move. The creatures had dragged me down, their limbs twisting around me like some macabre tangle of roots, pulling me into the heart of the chasm. I fought, but there was no strength left in me. My body was numb, the cold creeping deeper into my skin with every second I was submerged in that crushing darkness. The air was thick, suffocating, filled with a pungent, metallic stench. I could hear them, whispers, clicks, skittering limbs brushing against the walls. The creatures weren't just after flesh. They were after something more, something that lurked deeper within the chasm, something that they fed on, something I had unwittingly come to understand was tied to the very soul of this place. I felt the pressure on my chest ease slightly, and I gasped, trying to fill my lungs with air. But the moment I inhaled, the darkness responded. The air itself seemed to thicken, to pulse, as if the chasm was alive, feeding off me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't have come," one voice hissed, not from the creatures, but from the rock itself. It resonated deep inside my skull, sending waves of pain through my mind. The chasm was speaking. It was alive in ways that defied comprehension. I couldn't stop the image from forming in my head. The canyon, an endless, gaping maw, a predator that consumed not only flesh but will, spirit, and memory. The creatures were its extensions, its hands reaching into the world of the living, gathering those foolish enough to enter. They weren't simply hunting us. They were harvesting us, piece by piece. The ground beneath me trembled as if the canyon itself was breathing, a deep rumble resonating through the walls. The creatures around me paused, their eyes glinting in the dim light that flickered from my helmet. They were waiting. I didn't know how much time had passed. Could have been minutes, hours, or days. Time was meaningless here. But then, through the crushing silence, a thought emerged, sharp and clear. I was still alive. The chasm had taken Jonah, or perhaps it was too late for him to even be considered a living thing. But I, somehow impossibly, was still here. The creatures had fed on my fear, my despair, but they hadn't yet consumed me. I had to escape. The knife, my only weapon, was still clenched in my hand, though my grip was weak. I couldn't see clearly. I couldn't hear properly, but I could feel the vibrations in the rock. The chasm was calling, but there was a rhythm to it, a pulse, a song. It was not just the creatures that were connected to the stone. The very rock was singing, vibrating in ways I couldn't fully understand but knew instinctively. It was trying to draw me deeper, but there was an opening, a weak point, a way out. I pulled myself together, focusing through the haze of pain and fear. I couldn't allow the chasm to claim me. Not yet. I wasn't finished. The creatures were still circling me, their clicking legs brushing the stone. I could hear their breaths, heavy, rhythmic, like the sound of some monstrous insect waiting to strike. But I had learned enough in the time I'd spent in their world. I had learned how to move without making noise, how to feel the smallest vibrations in the stone, how to measure the silence before a strike. With a deep, shuddering breath, I began to crawl, not toward the creatures, but away from them, away from the heart of the chasm, the rope, the ledge, the way back to the surface. But every inch of progress was met with a warning. A hum in the walls, a sharp click from behind me, as if the creatures knew what I was trying to do. The ground shook again, this time more violently, and the creatures responded immediately, their limbs clicking against the stone, 1,000 cold eyes staring, waiting. The hum grew louder, a deeper frequency vibrating through the rock. I realized that the chasm was reacting to my movement, to my escape. It was trying to keep me here. The creatures were the chasm's agents, and I was the prize. But I had no choice. I crawled faster now, my hands burning with the effort, my body too weak to maintain any sort of steady movement. Every shift in position caused a ripple of sound, a pulse that the creatures would track, but I kept moving. I wasn't sure where the strength came from. It wasn't my body. It wasn't my will. It was something else. Something in the stone, something in the air, something that wanted me to survive. And then I heard it. The scream came from Jonah. It echoed through the walls, twisted and unnatural. A cry that was both human and not. It shattered the silence. And in that instant I knew. Jonah wasn't gone. Not yet. The creatures around me froze. The air grew still, as if everything in the chasm was holding its breath. Then, slowly, the click of their limbs resumed, but it was different now. More urgent, more deliberate. They were following the sound of Jonah's scream. They were leaving me behind. For a moment, I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to turn back, to follow them, to see what had happened to him, but I knew better. The chasm had taken him, yes, but it wasn't done with him. Not by a long shot. I reached the rope. It was just within reach, but my strength was failing me. The creatures were still close, but they were distracted, momentarily drawn to the echoes of Jonah's scream. They hadn't realized I was near the rope until it was too late. I grabbed the rope with trembling hands, pulling myself up with every ounce of strength I had left. The chasm roared beneath me, its angry hum vibrating through the walls as if it had noticed the shift. The creatures hissed, their limbs skittering across the rock as they rushed toward me. But I didn't stop, couldn't stop. The ledge above was a blur as I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the stone, desperate to cling to it. And then I pulled myself up, dragging Jonah's lifeless form with me. The world above, the sky, the light, they felt like another lifetime. But the creatures were still down there, still hunting, still waiting for me to make a mistake. I didn't know how I survived. I didn't know how I made it to the surface. But I was here now, outside. The cold, fresh air filled my lungs. The sunlight, pale and weak through the canyon's narrow opening, felt like a distant memory. But I couldn't escape. Not yet. Jonah's body lay beside me. The chasm had taken him, or perhaps it had never truly released him. He was too pale, too still. His skin was marked by the same cold touch that had gripped me, but his eyes remained open, staring blankly ahead. I knew he was gone, but I also knew the creatures weren't finished. They had been waiting, they had been watching, and they had seen me. I had escaped for now, but I would never escape them. Not entirely. The hollow chasm would never let go. It had claimed Jonah. It had claimed me, and one way or another it would take everything. The canyon stretched out before me, vast and oppressive, a yawning mouth ready to swallow anything that dared to come too close. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Jonah was gone, but I was still alive, but marked by the chasm, by its dark pulse, its endless hunger. And there was one thing I knew for sure. It wasn't done with me. I could feel it in my bones. The creatures still lurked beneath the rock, watching, waiting. But there was more than just them. The chasm itself. I knew now that it was more than just a canyon. It wasn't simply a physical place. It was an entity, ancient and hungry, a being that had existed long before mankind dared to set foot near its depths. The weight of that truth pressed on my chest as I stood there, gazing down into the dark abyss. It wasn't just the creatures that hunted me. The chasm had marked me. It had whispered to me, through the scraping of its creatures, through the vibrations in the stone, through the very air. It had woven itself into my being, like an infection, a sickness I could never escape. I looked down at Jonah again, my heart twisting. His body was still warm, his features frozen in an expression of fear I couldn't erase. He hadn't died naturally. The chasm had claimed him piece by piece, stripping him of his life until only his shell remained. And now it wanted me, too. I staggered backward, the weight of the truth sinking in. I had escaped for now, but for how long? The chasm wasn't like any natural force. It was alive, and it had taken an interest in me. It didn't simply consume flesh. It fed on fear, on despair, on life itself. And now I carried it with me, a mark I couldn't wash off, a presence that would follow me until my last breath. I needed to get out of here. I needed to leave the canyon, to escape the endless pull of its depths. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't unsee what had happened. The creatures, they had seen me. They knew my name. They knew I was the one who had dared to climb, to reach the top. And now they were waiting for the moment I would slip, the moment I would falter. The whispering started again, quiet at first, but unmistakable. Came from everywhere and nowhere. The walls of the canyon seemed to hum with the words, vibrating beneath my feet. Leave this place or be claimed. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest, and for a brief, horrible moment, I thought the chasm had already taken my mind. But no, it wasn't my imagination. It was real. The chasm was speaking directly to me. It wanted me to leave, to never return. But deep down, I knew there was no escaping it. The chasm had claimed me as it had claimed Jonah, as it had claimed all the others before us. My mind raced. I thought of the others who had come here before us, the ones who had vanished into the darkness, the ones whose bodies would never be found. The chasm had taken them all, and now it was after me. I had to leave. I had to keep moving, but there was nowhere to run. The path back was a treacherous descent into the abyss, and the creatures were still down there, still waiting. There was only one way out, the way I had come in, and it was the only way the chasm would allow. I glanced back at Jonah's body one last time. There was nothing left to do for him. The chasm had taken him as it had taken everything. His face was frozen in a permanent expression of terror, as if he had seen something at the very end that had broken his mind. I couldn't linger here. I couldn't let the chasm claim me like it had claimed him. I turned, my legs shaking with exhaustion, and I started walking. The path ahead was narrow and steep, but I didn't hesitate. I couldn't afford to. Every step was measured, every sound scrutinized. The chasm was still watching, still listening. I could feel its presence, its pulse, pounding in the depths of the earth. The further I moved, the more the whispering grew. It surrounded me, curling into my thoughts, dragging at my sanity like fingers scraping across the inside of my skull. "Leave," it whispered. "Come no closer." I reached the narrow part of the canyon, the point where I had once thought the journey might end in triumph. But now it felt like a final passage, a corridor between life and death. The stone beneath my feet seemed to pulse with every step, every heartbeat. The walls were no longer solid. They moved with a life of their own. They seemed to breathe. I kept going. I didn't have a choice. But the further I went, the more I realized that there was no escaping. The chasm wasn't something you simply left behind. It had its claws in me now, in my very mind. It wasn't just a physical space. It was inside me, its hunger, its will. I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, pulling me toward the very depths I had tried to escape. Then, ahead of me, I saw it. The opening, the narrow slit of light that had once promised safety, that had once felt like an escape. It was now a door, but not to the outside world. It was a door to something else, something darker, something that had always been there, waiting. The creatures were closer now. I could hear their skittering limbs, their frantic movement behind me, echoing off the canyon walls. They were gaining on me. I could feel them. They were in me now, attached to my very soul. Their hunger was my hunger. Their thirst was my thirst. And there was no escaping it. I pushed myself forward, my legs burning with the effort, my breath shallow and ragged. I wasn't running anymore. I was being chased. I reached the opening, the slit of light above me, but as my hands grasped for the rocks to climb, I heard a low, guttural sound that stopped me cold. It was a voice, one I knew, one I would never forget. "You cannot escape." It was Jonah's voice, but it wasn't him anymore. His voice had been twisted, warped by whatever the chasm had done to him. It was an echo, a shadow of the man I had known. I turned, heart hammering, to find him standing there, his body slack, his skin pale and stretched tight over bone. His eyes were dark pits, hollow and empty. And then the creatures appeared beside him. His hands, those same hands that had once been human, reached out toward me, too long, too cold. "You should have stayed," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry earth. "The chasm owns us. It claims all who enter." And then, with a suddenness that stole the air from my lungs, the walls of the canyon seemed to shift. The ground beneath me trembled violently, and the earth itself seemed to collapse inward. The chasm was tightening around me. The creatures had surrounded me now, their limbs outstretched, their mouths open wide, waiting to consume whatever was left of me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't escape. But there was one thing I knew for certain. The chasm would never let go, and I had become just another part of it. I stood there, frozen, caught in the unnatural stillness of the chasm's hold. The creatures loomed around me, silent now, their empty eyes fixed on my every move. Jonah's twisted form was no longer human, but something else entirely. a hollow echo of the person I had once known, consumed and transformed by the canyon's insidious pull. He was no longer the man I had cared for. He was part of the chasm, its puppet, a grotesque marionette that only existed to serve the hunger of the abyss. I wanted to scream, to run, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by an unnatural silence. The creatures didn't move, but I could feel them, like 1,000 invisible eyes, their presence crawling beneath my skin, digging into the deepest parts of my mind. They weren't just predators, they were a reflection of the chasm itself. A living, breathing force that fed on everything. Fear, life, hope, memories. Everything that made us human. Jonah's voice came again, but it was quieter now, almost drowned by the low hum that vibrated in the very air. It calls. His voice was raw, broken. It has always called, calls to those who can hear. And once you hear it, there's no turning back. His words wrapped around me, like chains pulling me down. The chasm had called to me. I had heard it from the moment I set foot in this accursed place. The whispers, the vibrations in the stone, the unnerving silence before the creatures attacked. It had been feeding on my fear all along, slowly gnawing at my soul until I had become just another part of the chasm's endless hunger. The walls seemed to pulse around me, the stones shifting, groaning as if the chasm itself was awakening, eager to claim its prize. I could hear the creatures shifting beneath the ground, their limbs clicking softly as they moved closer, circling, waiting. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I was suffocating in the weight of it all. Jonah, my friend, my partner, was gone, devoured by the chasm. His body was nothing more than a shell now, a broken fragment of what had once been a man. And I was next. But then something shifted inside me. A spark of defiance, fragile and fleeting. But it was enough. I wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. With trembling hands, I gripped the knife that had once been my only hope of survival. The blade was dull now, its edge worn from the countless struggles, but it was still sharp enough to cut. I had nothing left to lose. I turned to Jonah's body, the twisted, hollow version of him. His eyes, those dark, empty pits, locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker. Something human, something familiar. "You can't escape," he whispered again, but his voice had changed. There was a strange sadness in it, as if he had once known that he had lost his fight long before the chasm had claimed him. "It owns us now." I couldn't speak. There were no words left for him, no plea I could make to a body that no longer existed. All I could do was move as fast as my failing body would allow. I backed up slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I knew better now. The chasm was too deep. It was too vast. It had already claimed too much, and no matter how far I went, it would always be behind me, stretching out into the abyss. And then I heard the scrape, the unmistakable sound of claws against stone. One, then another, and another. The creatures were moving. They were coming closer. I darted to the side, my heart pounding in my chest. The edge of the ledge was just a few feet away, and I knew I had to make it there or I would be swallowed whole by the chasm. The creatures were relentless, but they were slow, waiting for the moment to strike. I had the advantage. For now. I leapt forward, my body a blur of movement. My hands scraped against the stone as I pushed myself higher, my legs burning with every frantic pull. The creatures were close, their breathing sharp and rasping, their bodies churning in the dark. I could feel their eyes on me, their hunger thick in the air. But as I reached the edge, I saw something that made my stomach turn. The slit of light, the opening I had once thought would save me, was closing. Slowly, the stone seemed to move, shifting back into place, sealing itself like the jaws of a trap. The way out was closing, and fast. The creatures were almost upon me. I had one choice. I leapt. The air rushed past me, the cold wind of the canyon scraping against my skin, and for a split second, I felt weightless, free. But then my hand grasped nothing but empty air. The stone wall of the canyon towered above me, its vastness swallowing all light, all hope. I had misjudged it. The distance was greater than I thought. I fell. The world tilted and spun around me, and for a moment, I thought I could hear Jonah's voice again, calling to me from the depths. Help me! I reached out, but there was nothing to grasp. My body tumbled downward, and the creatures were there, beneath me, beside me, everywhere. I could feel them, their cold, clammy limbs brushing against me as I descended, but I couldn't look. I couldn't stop myself. The darkness closed in, thick and suffocating. And then, just as I thought I would be crushed into oblivion, I hit the ground. But it wasn't the hard, jagged stone I expected. It was soft, like earth, damp, yielding, and it was alive. I could feel it, the pulse beneath the ground, vibrating through my entire body. The chasm had taken me. It had pulled me down into its heart. I tried to move, tried to stand, but my legs were weak, uncooperative. My head spun, and I felt a sudden dizziness, a sickness, overwhelming me. The creatures were all around me, their bodies moving in patterns I couldn't comprehend. They were circling, closing in, but I couldn't move fast enough. My body was heavy, sluggish, and my mind was unraveling. And then I saw it, the core of the chasm. It wasn't something I could have prepared for, something I could have even understood. It was alive, pulsing with the same dark rhythm that had plagued me since I first entered. The very stone itself seemed to breathe, and I felt it, deep within me, pulling me closer to it. This hunger, this power, the creatures, the walls, Jonah, all of it was a part of this, a part of the living chasm. I collapsed to my knees, the vibrations seeping into my bones, my flesh. The pulse of the chasm was in me now, and I knew with a terrible clarity that I would never leave. I would never escape. The hollow chasm would claim me. It had claimed Jonah. It had claimed all of us. There was no escape from its hunger, no end to its reach. It was vast. It was eternal. And as the creatures closed in around me, as the darkness swallowed me whole, I finally understood the truth. The chasm had always been waiting, waiting for us, waiting for me.